Hello data enthusiasts, welcome to the Open Data Cafe, the podcast of DataEuropa.eu, the official portal for European data. In each episode, our fantastic guests will share insights and experiences on open data, whether we're talking about how open data can foster transparency in government, kickstart innovative new businesses, enable powerful AIs, or empower citizens like you and me. We got it all covered. I'm your host, Gianfranco Cecconi. I've been knee-deep in the data sharing scene for quite some time, many of which contributing to DataEuropa.eu. Today I'm the Executive Director of the Data Spaces Support Center, yet another initiative dedicated to the implementation of the European Data Strategy. Our guest for today is John Harnisher, Head of Research at DataKind. John and I will discuss why it is critical for the success of data projects to start by preparing the data itself, cleaning it up and homogenizing it. We'll describe what we mean by data governance and the challenge of keeping track of the sources of data. And now, let's meet John. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
Good morning. Where do I find you today?
Today, I am in my home in Westfield, New Jersey, right outside of New York City.
Okay, well, as usual, I'm calling from the Netherlands, where I'm based. It's a few hours distance, but I'm happy we found a way to have you as one of our guests, and today in particular. Before we go down the topics we would like to deal with you, please tell us about you and your organizations, DataKind.
Sure. My name is John Harnisher, and I am the head of research at an organization called DataKind. And what we do at DataKind is a nonprofit that brings AI, machine learning, and data science capabilities to social impact organizations. So our big goal is really to allow social impact organizations to have the same availability of the newest and most critically important and impactful techniques from data science available to them as are available in in the for-profit world. So that's what we do. We're very excited to do that and very excited to move the missions of social impact organizations that are using data for good into a positive direction.
Thank you. And I believe I need to do a disclaimer and at the same time an endorsement, because I volunteered for DataKind for many years. When I lived in the UK, I led with other volunteers the chapter for London, and I have very good memories of the work we did at the time, working mostly in that case with London for local non-profits and other kinds of charities, all of them with similar kind of problems that I believe will be probably the main topic for today. That is the very basics of starting a data project that usually finds the earliest elements of friction and challenges in cleaning up the data itself. It's a bit like going for shopping and having to clean the vegetables before you can even start cooking them. I mean, to use, I'm Italian, so I'm allowed to make analogies about food. Can you tell us more about how, in the work you do for nonprofits and other NGOs and so on, how big is the problem of cleaning the data that you use as an input into the work before you can even start creating insight?
Yeah, I would say it probably is the spot where we spend the most amount of time in terms of the timelines for running projects, is in that initial stage of finding the data, cleaning the data, having that data be organized, and understanding even what's available in the data. Those are the spaces where we, in many of our projects, really need to dig in. And a lot of the organizations that we work for aren't necessarily tremendously mature in terms of their data capabilities and their data understanding. So it does get to a little bit of a discussion of what is available and how might you make that data ready to even begin to analyze and begin to work on the kinds of important projects that are brought forward. Because a lot of times what will happen is this notion of, we've got a lot of data available, we've been collecting all this data for such a long time, what can we learn about it? What can we do with it? And I think there is sometimes an understanding that there might be a quick shortcut that someone's going to open up a completely clean, already organized set of tables, set of data, and be able to get insights immediately. But there is this process of, let's go back and let's look at what you have available, how it's been organized, and whether it's ready to even begin to answer some of the important questions that might be asked.
And we're not going to tell anyone, but can you tell me the secret? Why is it that we are so bad at keeping data in good shape that we need to put so much effort in cleaning it up before we start doing anything?
Yeah, there are lots of reasons for that one, I think. One is the data aren't necessarily collected in order to get an answer to the kinds of questions that people are trying to answer, right? Data is collected operationally, data is collected just based upon transactions, based upon what's already available, but they aren't necessarily, there isn't always a discussion of how might we best get insights from all of the data that we're about to begin to collect. So a lot of discussions of things like data engineering and best data practices aren't, sometimes they're done, but a lot of times they aren't done ahead of time before the data is collected. So it gets to be this repository of data that might be useful for from an operational standpoint, for example. The data may be collected for other purposes. And now the question is, could we learn more about this data to solve some of the big, or answer some of the big questions that are being put to us as an organization? So I don't think it's done. I don't think it's done out of negligence. Certainly not out of any poor processes that are put in place. It's often just a lack of thinking about where that data is going to go and what kind of outputs and what kind of insights might be able to be gained from that data.
And we often say that data should be managed as an asset in a way. So what you describe, it's common when you collect or create data just for a specific purpose and you don't think at all about the opportunity you may have at some later point to reuse it for another purpose. And so it goes straight to, let's say, tick the minimum possible number of boxes to be used by that application or for that specific objective. And someone later will take care of repurpose it, clean it up, reorganize it, and to make it more portable and reusable. While particularly we talk about open data, instead it's all about that. It's all about particularly thinking of governments as publishers, as author of data. It's about putting those data sets out for anybody to reuse for whatever purpose, if the license is right. And if we think in a way that that's small, we are dumping the work on someone else, as simple as that. Now, I was wondering if it is just about quality of data, it's about the format. Can you go a bit more in the detail, if you don't mind, just to make a couple of examples that make it a bit more real? And what is the kind of actual work that your volunteer data scientists or data engineers need to do before we can call it clean?
Yeah, so there are lots of different things that happen in that space. But for example, sometimes we're trying to look at organizing data and maybe building a visualization. So let's say we've been asked to build a visualization or build a map of assets in a certain area. And so we begin with, all right, do we have an understanding of even what those assets might be? So let's say we're trying to look at a visualization of services that are available in a certain city. And we want to see, we want to build that map so that it would be easy for folks who are searching for those services to be able to find them and understand where they're at and call them if necessary, find their websites, bring all of that together into one spot. But at the very beginning, that data may not be available, or as you said, it may be available in such a way that it is, we only have a certain piece of that data. So we have to dig into what else could be available. And from as a data science organization, it's our job to figure out the context of what's happening here, right? So very often there's an understanding from the organization that wants to be working on the project, working on the problem. There's so much context available to them already that we as an outside agency need to come in and begin to understand. So in addition to it being, what's the quality of the data? How do I dig into the actual data points that are available? How do I start to understand whether these components are even there to be used and to create such a map, in this case of a visualization? There's also that component of, we just don't understand fully what the context of the data are and how we might be able to fit that into a space, and building in this case, when a visualization is built, it needs to be able to live after we've built it. Right? One of the purposes of these kinds of projects is to make sure that we're driving forward this idea of someone being able to more easily access services. So if someone doesn't hit that goal at the end, then it almost doesn't matter all of the data work that's been done, all of the cleaning work, all of the data engineering, all of the repurposing of data to the right end. If that doesn't result in a map, in this case, that could be used by the clients of this organization, by the customers of this organization, if you will, then we really haven't gotten anywhere. And so that, I think, is a big component of that.
There's only one thing perhaps we haven't touched yet, and I don't know if I would have a cooking analogy with, that is data governance. For our audience, can you explain us a little what we mean by data governance in general, and how it does apply to projects like the ones your volunteers perform for your
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so data governance is really all about the way that we deal with, from a legal and from an ethical standpoint, how are we going to be using the data? What are we allowed to do with the data? How should we be using that in a way that protects lots of folks, but in addition, especially protects the folks that are actually the subject of the data, right? The people, what those zeros and ones actually represent. So the thinking about a conversation about data governance is really important. And we always start off with a series of sharing agreements and, looking at how organizations understand data governance. And it depends on where you are in the world, what the level of data governance is as well, right? There are certain parts of the world, there's more regulation around the way that data is used than in others. But at DataKind, we really critically view a lot of components of the data as important, and make sure that we have our own processes around how we handle it and what we would do in order to make sure that the data is used in an ethical fashion, and that it's used in a way that conforms with those laws, whether it be GDPR if you're in Europe, or whether it be some of the laws that we have in other parts of the world. But the important thing is to have a strong understanding with the organization that you're working with early on about what the rules are, right? And governance is really about the rules and regulations in general for data usage, and for the outcome of the data as well. Where is this going to go, and what are you going to do with this when it's done? And what kinds of conclusions could you draw from this data, right? That also has to do with what the data were all about, how were they organized, and how were they governed. But when I think about data governance, I often think about data protection and data protection laws, and that's becoming more and more critical as we move into the world of AI, and we move into lots of places where there isn't as much an understanding of the modeling of the data, and it isn't as transparent what went into the models, what went into the outcomes that you're getting from that data. So when that happens, it's even more important to understand, well, what are the rules around this? What is the governance structure, and how are we making sure to keep a level of protection available? And that's becoming more and more difficult. And you'll know there's a lot going on in the world of figuring out data governance, particularly for AI over this summer and into the fall now.
Yeah, and as we scale up and use more and more data, we also use multiple sources as well. And if data governance is not efficient, we may easily lose track of where the data comes from. So elements like provenance, lineage, who are the data stewards, the people responsible for those data sets we use, or who can at least document where data comes from, so we can rely upon, have we got the right to use it? Have we got the right to redistribute it? Have we got the right to use it to train AIs, as the example you made earlier? And the more those elements of input are in number, in volume perhaps, even more complicated and more important the role of data governance becomes. You named the I word, interoperability, right? That just to cut it simple, it's simply the capability of multiple systems to interact with each other. It's not necessarily just data, it could be APIs or technology systems in general. And actually, if you go back to let's say the doctrine, you will find out that interoperability can also be defined at process level, legal level. It's simply the way at all these let's say planes, the systems can talk to each other in ways that are at least compatible with some degree of transformation and so on. You operate in not only in the United States, of course, but your experience, I guess, is closer to the US. And the US is a federal state, right? I'm going to make a cheeky question there. That is, how good are the states in the US to be interoperable between them in the data they publish and they offer for projects like the ones DataKind does?
I mean, that depends very heavily, but I spent a lot of time working in education, and so have spent a good amount of time looking at education systems and data within education, and that there are federal standards, and there are times when there's data available across the US, but most of that data is in state systems, and varies from state to state, even sometimes from school district to school district. And so it has not been built with interoperability in mind. It's been built with this idea of working within one system. So if you are really interested in deeply understanding what happens at the state of Wisconsin, you can get through all the data for the state of Wisconsin. But then as soon as you need to do a comparison between Wisconsin and Minnesota, a neighboring state, it's very difficult. And so it becomes, you have to build entirely new systems to be able to understand that and to even answer a very similar question across those, unless there does happen to be some data that's either available, even private data that's available that is interoperable because it's in a system that's outside of the state systems, or there's some federal data available, but it is not, it's as we said earlier, the systems were not built with that idea in mind, so they don't work with that space. They don't work well within that space. But the big set of, I think, wins and the next set of understanding about data for big problems will probably be rested upon interoperability of data, interoperability of systems, interoperability of processes, because that's when all components come together. DataKind is working right now in a major project on humanitarian data for humanitarian crises, and bringing together all sorts of data from all kinds of sources all over the world to on a humanitarian crisis is really a very good crucible for understanding this issue, because it has to happen, and it has to happen quickly. And so when the data are interoperable and the systems are interoperable, it is a big challenge, but it is one that DataKind is working on a couple of projects for. And I think that deeply shows where the positives and the negatives lie in such a process. But back to the question about interoperability between states, it's not necessarily it wasn't done by design. So you're kind of coming in and working on top of a a process that wasn't designed to answer the question that you wanted to answer, right? The borders were put up because these things were funded within, things are looked at within, things are analyzed within, the students stay within. So it's a very closed kind of system that you're trying to, create an interoperability with. And so that can be challenging.
And in a way, it's a similar problem to the one we described earlier, where data is created or collected for one specific purpose, and we don't worry about making it a pret-a-porter for another kind of application. Interoperability, let's say being aware of interoperability is also in the process or the way of thinking, possibly even from a cultural perspective, by which you prepare your asset for being interoperable with others in the future. From a certain point of view, in Europe, we are not particularly better, I would say, with all respect for the many colleagues who work in this space. There were major efforts, for example, for interoperability in geospatial data, thanks to the INSPIRE directive many years ago. They started homogenizing how the member states in Europe create and collect geospatial data, particularly for environmental applications. More recently, the Open Data Directive has defined something we call the high-value datasets that are a very specific set of datasets across a certain number of categories, 7 of them, from companies' data to geospatial to transport and so on. And all member states are expected to publish about the same datasets in about the same specifics and detail and so on. Now, it's a long process. Personally, I don't expect that magically the problem will be solved for the ones who are not watching the video version, I snap my fingers, but it's not going to be that easy. But at least we're moving in that direction. And the focus on the most valuable data sets possibly is a way by which you can collect all the efforts around simpler, focused use cases. That data is so important for transport. That data is so important for being aware of the organizations active on our territory in our state. That data is so important to define, say, viability and transport means or the energy distribution over the country. All of those data sets will make a difference. And in a way, we can also use them to educate to the importance of interoperability. The more we converge, the more we are effective in making them available to the public.
Yeah, and I think the other component there is similar to something we were talking about earlier, is when you have these major data sets that are hitting on energy, really important components like that, and the effort has been put in to create interoperability across multiple states, multiple parts of an ecosystem, and then that data is actually used to solve those problems, and it does show that the interoperability makes it easier and allows you to kind of think about things a little bit more systematically, right? Brings the entire thing up a level, if you will. That it sort of becomes a positive process of, oh, now I see why all that work has been done into that space, and we have this kind of data available in energy. Wouldn't it be great if we had something similar? We need to do more work in agriculture to get at a similar level of data so that we could build the questions up in that space. So I do think there's a lot of exemplar driven positive wins that kind of have a snowball effect and make more people get interested in that space.
My last question for you perhaps is a bit a tricky one. It's not a joke, but I'm curious to see how you see it. Will we ever stop needing cleaning data? And when in this ideal world I envision for you, what will be the next bigger part of the effort that we will have to spend to solve the problems with data?
Yeah, so I don't think we're going to ever be able to move away from this initial stage of having to clean data, because we don't always anticipate what it is that we're going to be using the data for, and the questions that we want to have answered are going to change after data systems are established. Now, there will be, I think, some call to go back and reconfigure systems and collect new sources of data, and there's always that that kind of circular need to kind of improve. But I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to be a component with us as long as we're working within data. It would be interesting to see if some of the technologies and some of the newer things in the world of the generative AI space and those spaces, if any of that could be applied to the cleaning of data even more, right? And so we've worked in some things for creating toolkits, for example, at DataKind that help to look at evaluations and look at analysis, and automatically take a look at does this data look like it could be used for analysis purposes. But I don't think that it would be a bad idea for us to start thinking a little bit more about how do we get more mature in that space, and start applying more rigor in that way. But I don't think it's going to go away. I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, that was my rhetorical question, perhaps of me. I expected you, unfortunately, to say that. Before I let you, before I let you go, where can our audience find out more about DataKind besides the episode notes that we will also share? Yeah,
so I would definitely have us come to our website, datakind.org. Check us out in that space. DataKind also, we do lots of events. We have events that are public facing about lots of different topics that are out there. We do data 101s, which give people early information about different kinds of topics within data. And we also do these things called data dives. So anybody who'd be interested in volunteering for they're usually weekend activities, 1 day or 2 days, where you can come in and work on an important problem that we work on with a partner, and you come in and we have tasks from really low code tasks all the way to heavy data science tasks that are available. So we'd love to have anybody who would be interested in join us.
Great, thank you. So see you the next data dive, and in the meantime, thanks again for being with us, and good luck with the next projects.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.